Hello friends, about the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed. And I would be really happy if you do so. Also don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you. Dude, are you sure about this trail? I asked Mark, swatting at a mosquito buzzing around my head. It looks kinda deserted. Mark, ever the optimist, just grinned and shrugged. Relax, it's fine. Besides, Buddy needs to stretch his legs, right boy? He ruffled our golden retriever's fur, who was happily sniffing at every rock and blade of grass. We were a couple hours into our Colorado camping trip, and after setting up camp and choking down some questionable campfire hot dogs, we decided to explore. Mark had found this trailhead on some obscure hiking website. Supposedly, it was a hidden gem with amazing views. So far, all I'd seen were trees and more trees. The trail itself wasn't bad, a little overgrown maybe, but nothing too crazy. The problem was, we hadn't seen another soul for the entire hike. No other hikers, no dog walkers, not even a stray squirrel. It was starting to feel a little eerie, especially with the sun dipping lower and shadows stretching out like long fingers. Buddy, oblivious to my growing unease, trotted ahead, his tail wagging excitedly. He was about 20 yards in front of us when he suddenly froze, ears perked, head cocked. Then, he just turned around and started walking back towards us. Buddy? What's up, boy? I called out, but he ignored me, his tail now tucked between his legs. He walked right past us, a low growl rumbling in his throat. That's weird, Mark said, frowning. He's never done that before. I tried calling Buddy again, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept walking, heading back down the trail the way we came. I don't like this, I muttered, a shiver running down my spine. Something's not right. Mark and I exchanged a nervous glance. Buddy was usually glued to my side, especially on hikes. This whole thing felt off, like a switch had flipped in the woods and suddenly everything was wrong. Maybe he saw a deer? Mark offered, but his voice lacked conviction. In broad daylight, walking back towards us. I scoffed. Nah, something spooked him. I pulled out my phone to check the signal. Nothing, of course. Typical. We were miles from civilization, the sun was sinking fast, and our dog was acting possessed. Just fantastic. We should go after him, I said, already starting to head back down the trail. He could get lost out here. Mark hesitated. I don't know, man. What if something spooked him? Like, something bad? I stopped, my stomach twisting. Mark wasn't usually one to get freaked out, but he had a point. Buddy was a pretty fearless dog. What could scare him like that? As if to answer my question, a low growl echoed through the trees, deep and guttural, sending chills down my spine. It wasn't Buddy. This was something else, something bigger, something predatory. Okay, yeah, screw that, Mark said, his voice tight. We're out of here. He grabbed my arm and we practically sprinted down the trail, The image of Buddy's terrified face burned into my mind. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sounded like a monster stalking us. We didn't slow down until we reached the clearing where we parked the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the damn thing in the ignition. As we peeled out of there, I kept glancing back at the darkening woods, hoping to see Buddy emerge, tail wagging, like nothing had happened. But there was nothing but the deepening shadows and the lingering feeling of dread. We had lost Buddy, and something told me this was just the beginning. The drive back to the campsite felt like an eternity. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the occasional panicked whimper from Mark. I kept replaying the growl in my head, trying to identify it, to rationalize it. Was it a bear? A mountain lion? But deep down, a primal part of me knew it was something different, something wrong. We pulled up to our campsite, the tent looking pathetically small and vulnerable in the gathering darkness. Should we pack up? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. Leaving meant abandoning Buddy, and the thought of him alone out there, lost and scared, made my chest ache. But the memory of that growl, the sheer terror in Buddy's eyes, made my blood run cold. We can't leave him, I said, my voice cracking. We have to go back. Mark looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Are you crazy? After what we just heard? We're sitting ducks out here. He was right, of course. We were completely unprepared. No weapons, no cell service, just two city boys with a rapidly dwindling supply of courage. But the thought of leaving Buddy to whatever was out there was unbearable. We'll be careful, I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. We'll stick to the trail, make a lot of noise. Maybe he's just hiding somewhere, scared. Mark reluctantly agreed, and we grabbed our flashlights, the beams doing little to pierce the oppressive darkness that had settled over the woods. We cautiously made our way back down the trail, our every sense on high alert. The woods were alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the hooting of an owl, the cracking of branches under our feet. Each sound sent a jolt of fear through me, my imagination conjuring up images of unseen creatures lurking just beyond the reach of our flashlights. We called out for Buddy, our voices echoing through the silent trees, but there was no response. Just the growing sense that we were being watched, hunted. And then, we saw it. It wasn't something I saw, not at first. It was a smell. A thick, musky odor, like a wet dog mixed with something rotten. It made my stomach churn and my eyes water. Mark gagged beside me, his flashlight beam dancing wildly. What the hell is that? He choked out, his voice hoarse. I shone my light in the direction of the stench, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. Tracks, huge paw prints, easily twice the size of Buddy's, pressed deep into the mud. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen before. They were too wide, too long, the claws marks incredibly deep. Those aren't bear tracks, Mark whispered, his face pale in the flickering light. I knew he was right. I'd seen bear tracks before, on other hikes. These were different. More primal. We followed the tracks, fear spurring us on. They led us deeper into the woods, away from the trail, away from any sense of safety. The smell grew stronger with every step, making me want to vomit. Then, we saw it. A clearing, bathed in the pale moonlight filtering through the trees. And in the center of the clearing, a carcass. It was a deer, or what was left of it. Half-eaten, its insides spilled out onto the ground like a grotesque offering. The sight was so horrifying, so visceral, that I almost fainted. Mark let out a strangled cry and stumbled back, tripping over a root. The sound echoed through the silent woods, and I felt a surge of panic. We weren't alone. Something moved in the shadows at the edge of the clearing. A huge, dark shape, its eyes glinting in the moonlight. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel its presence, a palpable sense of menace that made my blood run cold. We turned and ran, the image of the mutilated deer seared into our minds. The creature didn't pursue us, but I could feel its eyes on our backs, its presence lingering in the air like a toxic cloud. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. We piled in, slamming the doors shut, the flimsy metal offering little comfort against the horrors we had witnessed. As we sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had been spared, that the creature had allowed us to leave. But for what purpose? And what had happened to Buddy? The next morning, the events of the previous night felt like a fever dream. Sunlight streamed through the cheap motel curtains, casting a sickly yellow glow over the dingy room. Mark was sprawled on the bed next to me, snoring softly, blissfully unaware. I, on the other hand, hadn't slept a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those tracks, that carcass, those glowing eyes. And Buddy. Always Buddy. I got out of bed, careful not to wake Mark, and stumbled over to the grimy window. We were in some no-name town, population probably somewhere in the double digits. The main street was deserted, except for a stray dog scavenging in a dumpster. The normalcy of it all felt jarring, a stark contrast to the horror we'd experienced just hours before. It was like we'd stepped out of a nightmare and into a postcard. But the nightmare was still with me, clinging to me like a shadow. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit around and wait for the inevitable breakdown. I needed answers. I grabbed my laptop and started Googling. Mountain lion attacks Colorado, unidentified animal tracks, missing dog Colorado. The search results were a mix of news articles, forum posts, and blurry photos of alleged cryptids. Nothing concrete, nothing that matched what we'd seen. Except for one thing. Deep down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and paranormal encounters, I stumbled upon a local legend. The Skinwalker. A shape-shifting creature said to inhabit the remote areas of the Southwest. It was described as a terrifying predator, capable of mimicking human voices and luring its victims to their deaths. The description sent chills down my spine. The growl, the tracks, the feeling of being watched, it all fit. Could it be? Could we have stumbled upon something truly supernatural? I showed the article to Mark when he woke up. He skimmed through it, his face a mixture of disbelief and growing horror. You think that's what we saw?" he stammered. I shrugged, I don't know what else to think. It explains everything. We spent the rest of the day researching, poring over every scrap of information we could find about skinwalkers. The more we read, the more convinced we became. This wasn't just some wild animal. This was something ancient, something evil. And it had taken body. The skinwalker lore was unsettling, to say the least. Apparently, these things weren't just mindless predators. They were intelligent, malevolent, and they enjoyed tormenting their prey. The stories online described them mimicking voices, setting traps, and even possessing people. It was enough to make your skin crawl. "We need to go back," I said to Mark, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "We need to find Buddy." Mark stared at me, his eyes wide. "Are you serious? After everything we've read? That thing could be anywhere." "I know," I said, my voice tight. "But we can't just leave him. What if he's still alive? What if he needs our help?" Mark hesitated, then sighed. "Fine," he said, his voice resigned. "But we're doing this smart. We get some supplies, maybe talk to some locals, see if anyone knows anything about this skinwalker thing." We spent the next few hours gathering supplies. We bought a map, a compass, a first aid kit, and a couple of heavy-duty flashlights. We even considered buying a gun, but neither of us knew the first thing about firearms. Besides, something told me a gun wouldn't do much good against a supernatural creature. We also stopped by the local diner, hoping to pick up some information from the locals. The waitress, a friendly woman with a weathered face and a kind smile, seemed surprised when we mentioned the skinwalker. "You boys be careful out there," she warned, her eyes filled with concern. "Those woods ain't safe, especially at night. There's things out there that ain't meant to be seen." She told us about some strange occurrences in the area, missing livestock, unexplained noises, and even a few disappearances. She said the locals knew to stay away from certain parts of the woods, especially after dark. Her words weren't exactly comforting, but they confirmed our suspicions. We were dealing with something dangerous, something that the locals feared. Armed with our new knowledge and supplies, we headed back to the trailhead. The sun was already beginning to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. We took a deep breath and stepped into the woods, our hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. We were going back for Buddy. The woods were different this time. Heavier. The air hung thick with a strange stillness, like the entire forest was holding its breath. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but the beauty felt ominous, a deceptive mask hiding the darkness lurking beneath. We stuck to the trail, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent our hearts racing. We scanned the trees, searching for any sign of Buddy, any clue, anything that would lead us to him. Do you think we'll find him?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. I squeezed his shoulder, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "We have to," I said. "We can't give up." But as the hours passed and the darkness deepened, my hope began to dwindle. We found nothing. No tracks, No signs of a struggle, no Buddy. Just the endless trees and the growing feeling that we were being watched. Then, we heard it. A faint whimper, tarried on the wind. It sounded like Buddy. Did you hear that? Mark whispered, his eyes wide. I nodded, my heart leaping with a mixture of hope and fear. It came from over there, I said, pointing towards a thicket of trees off the trail. We cautiously made our way towards the sound, our flashlights cutting through the undergrowth. The whimpering grew louder, more desperate. It was definitely Buddy. We burst through the thicket and into a small clearing. And there he was. Buddy was lying on the ground, his fur matted with blood, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. He looked up at us, his eyes filled with pain and fear. Buddy, I cried, rushing towards him. But before I could reach him, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, its skin a sickly gray, its eyes glowing like embers. It snarled at us, its teeth bared in a grotesque grin. The Skinwalker. Time seemed to freeze. The Skinwalker stood motionless, its glowing eyes fixed on us, a predator sizing up its prey. Buddy whimpered again, his tail thumping weakly against the ground. The sight of him, broken and helpless, filled me with a rage I'd never felt before. Get away from him! I roared, my voice cracking with a mixture of fear and fury. The Skinwalker tilted its head, as if amused by my outburst. It took a step towards us, its claws scraping against the ground. The stench of rot and decay grew stronger, making my stomach churn. Mark grabbed my arm, his grip tight. We have to go, he whispered, his voice trembling. We can't fight it. He was right. We were no match for this creature. But I couldn't just leave Buddy. Not again. I glanced around, desperately searching for a weapon, something, anything, to defend ourselves with. My eyes landed on a fallen branch, thick and heavy. I grabbed it, my knuckles white around the rough bark. Stay back, I yelled, brandishing the branch like a sword. The Skinwalker paused, its eyes flickering between me and the branch. It let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated through my bones. Then it lunged. It moved with a speed that defied its size, its claws outstretched like daggers. I swung the branch with all my might, connecting with its shoulder. The creature let out a screech of pain and stumbled back. But it wasn't enough. The Skinwalker recovered quickly, its eyes burning with rage. It lunged again, this time aiming for Mark. Mark screamed and tried to dodge, but it was too late. The creature's claws raked across his arm, tearing through his flesh. Mark cried out in pain and fell to the ground. I charged at the Skinwalker, my fear forgotten in a surge of adrenaline. I swung the branch again and again, hitting it in the face, the chest, anywhere I could reach. The creature roared in anger, its claws tearing at my clothes, my skin. I felt a sharp pain in my leg, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to protect Mark. Then, something unexpected happened. Buddy, despite his injuries, lunged at the Skinwalker, sinking his teeth into its leg. The creature howled in pain and turned on Buddy, its claws slashing at him. I saw my chance. I raised a branch and brought it down with all my might, hitting the skinwalker squarely on the head. The creature staggered, its eyes rolling back in its head. It let out a final groan and collapsed to the ground. It was over. We were both a mess. Mark was unconscious, blood oozing from the deep gash on his arm. Buddy was whimpering, his injured leg clearly broken. And me? I was covered in scratches and bruises, my leg throbbing with a dull ache. But we were alive. We had survived. I knelt beside Mark, checking his pulse. It was weak, but steady. Relief washed over me. He was going to be okay. Then, I turned my attention to Buddy. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and he was whimpering in pain. I gently examined it, my heart sinking. It was definitely broken. "Don't worry, boy," I whispered, stroking his fur. "We'll get you out of here." But how? We were miles from the trailhead, and it was pitch black. Carrying Mark and Buddy was out of the question. We were stranded. I looked at the skinwalker's body lying on the ground. It was a grotesque sight, its eyes still open, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. Even in death, it radiated an aura of menace. I rummaged through my backpack, hoping to find something, anything, that could help us. But there was nothing. Just a map, a compass, and a first aid kit. Wait. The first aid kit. I pulled it out and frantically searched through its contents. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, pain relievers, and a splint. It wasn't much, but it was something. I carefully cleaned and bandaged Mark's wound, then used a splint to stabilize Buddy's leg. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it would have to do. Now, we needed to find shelter. I remembered the waitress at the diner mentioning a ranger station a few miles from the trailhead. If we could reach it, we could call for help. I used the compass to orient myself, then picked up Mark, slinging his arm over my shoulder. Buddy limped alongside us, whimpering occasionally. The journey was agonizingly slow. Every step sent jolts of pain through my leg, and Mark's weight was almost unbearable. But we pressed on, driven by a desperate hope and the fear of what might be lurking in the darkness. As dawn broke, we stumbled out of the woods and onto a dirt road. In the distance, we could see the ranger station. We had made it. The ranger, a grizzled old guy named Hank, looked at us like we'd just crawled out from under a rock. And to be fair, we probably looked the part. Covered in blood, dirt, and what I could only assume was some kind of weird swamp gunk, we must have been a sight. "What in the blue blazes happened to you boys?" he exclaimed, his eyes widening as he took in our injuries. We recounted the whole story, the hike, the growl, the tracks, the skinwalker, everything. Hank listened intently, his expression a mix of disbelief and grim understanding. "Skinwalker, huh?" he said, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Well, I'll be damned. Never thought I'd see the day." He patched us up as best he could, then called for an ambulance to take Mark to the nearest hospital. Buddy got a makeshift splint and a lot of reassuring pats from Hank. He even offered to take him to a vet once things settled down. As we waited for the ambulance, Hank told us more about the Skinwalker legend. He said it was an old story, passed down through generations of Native Americans in the area. He said the creature was a powerful evil, and that we were lucky to be alive. "You boys did good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Most folks wouldn't have stood a chance against that thing." I didn't feel particularly brave. I felt exhausted, shaken, and more than a little traumatized. But I was alive. We were all alive. The ambulance arrived, and Mark was whisked away. Hank assured me he'd be fine, that the hospital was only a couple of hours away. I stayed at the ranger station, curled up on a cot with Buddy by my side. We both slept for a solid 12 hours. The next day, I called my parents. They were horrified, of course, but relieved that we were okay. They drove down to pick me and Buddy up, and we headed back home, leaving the horrors of the Colorado wilderness behind us. The experience changed us. Mark still has a nasty scar on his arm, a constant reminder of our encounter. Buddy walks with a slight limp, but he's otherwise back to his old self. And me? I still have nightmares sometimes. I still jump at every creak in the night. But I also have a newfound appreciation for life, for family, for the simple things. And I know, deep down, that the woods will never be the same. There are things out there, lurking in the shadows, things that we can't explain, things that we were never meant to see. But we survived. And that's all that matters. Okay, so this is my first time posting here, and honestly, I'm still freaking out about the whole thing. I don't even know where to start, but I guess I'll just dive right in. A few weeks ago, I was out in the middle of nowhere for this archaeology field school. We were camped out in the mountains, like, way up there, 7,500 feet. The nearest town was this tiny place called something or other, and it was a good 10 miles away, all on a dirt road that was barely wide enough for our truck. Our campsite was pretty basic, just a bunch of tents scattered around. No electricity, no running water, no cell service, the whole 9 yards. It was actually kind of cool at first, being all isolated and surrounded by nature and stuff. But then things started to get weird. It was the third night, I think. I was in my tent, trying to get some sleep. It was pretty quiet, except for the wind whistling through the trees. I remember thinking how dark it was, like pitch black. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. Then I heard it. This weird wheezing sound, like something was struggling to breathe. It was coming from right outside my tent. I froze, listening hard. My heart started pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? The sound got closer, and I could feel something brush against the side of my tent. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Whatever it was big, and it was right outside. And then, the tent just collapsed on top of me. I landed hard on my back, the wind knocked out of me. For a second, I just lay there, stunned, with the tent fabric pressed against my face. I could hear the wheezing sound right above me, closer than ever. It sounded almost excited, like it was happy that it had finally got me. Then something heavy landed on top of the tent, right on top of me. I couldn't breathe. I thrashed around, trying to get free, but it was like being trapped under a pile of rocks. The wheezing was louder now, right in my ear, and I swore I could feel hot, rank breath on my neck. Panic surged through me. I was going to die in this stupid tent, crushed by something. I didn't even know what it was. But I knew I couldn't just lie there and wait for it to finish me off. I remembered I had my pocket knife in my jeans. I fumbled for it, my hand shaking, but I couldn't get a grip. The thing on top of me shifted, and I felt a sharp pain in my leg. It had claws, or something. Screw the knife. I had to do something, anything. So I just lashed out, punching upwards with all my strength. My fist connected with something solid. It felt like hitting a sack of potatoes, but harder. There was a startled grunt, a sound that was definitely not human, and then the weight was suddenly gone. I scrambled up from under the tent, gasping for air. I scrambled out of the tent, falling onto my hands and knees. I was shaking so bad I could barely stand. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I couldn't catch my breath. But I had to get away from that tent, from whatever that thing was. I stumbled back a few feet, then turned and shone my flashlight around the campsite. It was pitch black, the beam of my flashlight swallowed up by the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. That wheezing sound was moving away, fading into the trees. I listened, every sense on high alert. The cold mountain air stung my lungs. I could smell pine needles and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. But there was no other sound. No sign of whatever had attacked me. I cautiously made my way back to the tent, shining my flashlight on the ground. That's when I saw them. Tracks, huge, freaking tracks in the dirt. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen before. Three-toed, with long claw marks, like something out of a Jurassic Park movie. I knelt down, shining my light on the tracks. They led right up to my tent, then circled around it, and then disappeared into the trees. Where the hell had it gone? I stood there for a long time, just staring at those tracks. My mind was racing. What the hell had just happened? Was it a bear? No, bears don't have 3 toes. A mountain lion? Maybe, but the tracks were too big. Way too big. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I was alone in the mountains, miles from civilization, and something was out there. Something big, something dangerous, something not human. The next morning, I told the other students and professors about what had happened. Most of them just looked at me like I was crazy. A bear? One of the guys scoffed. Dude, you were probably just dreaming. I wasn't dreaming. I insisted. I saw the tracks. They were huge, and they had 3 toes. Professor Davies, The head archaeologist tried to be reassuring. Look, I'm sure you were just startled. It's easy to get spooked out here in the wilderness. Maybe it was a mountain lion or some other animal you're not familiar with. But I could tell he didn't really believe me either. We all went back to my tent to check out the tracks. They were even weirder in the daylight. The claw marks were deep, like they could tear through flesh like paper. And the size of them, it was like something out of a horror movie. One of the other professors, Dr. Ramirez, was examining the tracks closely. She looked up at me, her brow furrowed. These are unlike anything I've ever seen before, she admitted. But there are stories, local legends, about creatures that live in these mountains. Creatures that... She hesitated. Well, creatures that aren't supposed to exist. I rolled my eyes. Come on, Dr. Ramirez. You don't believe in that stuff, do you? She shrugged. I'm a scientist. I believe in evidence. And these tracks, they're certainly evidence of something. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. Every little creak of the tent, every rustle in the trees, sent my heart racing. I lay there, clutching my pocket knife, staring up at the tent ceiling. The image of those three-toed tracks kept flashing through my mind. I felt like I was being watched. Like something was out there, in the darkness, just beyond the circle of my flashlight beam. I kept catching glimpses of movement in the periphery of my vision, but whenever I turned my head, there was nothing there. The hours crawled by. The wind picked up, howling through the trees like a banshee. I felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that something bad was about to happen. And then I heard it again. That wheezing sound. Closer this time. Much closer. It was coming from the edge of the campsite, just beyond the ring of tents. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it in the direction of the sound. For a moment, I saw nothing. Just the dark shadows of the trees. And then it stepped out of the shadows. It was tall, way taller than any man I'd ever seen. Gaunt, almost skeletal, with long, spindly limbs that ended in bony fingers tipped with what looked like claws. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over its frame. But it was the head that really got me. It was wrong. Misshapen, elongated, with huge, black eyes that seemed to burn with an eerie light. And its mouth, oh God, its mouth. It was a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. The creature stood at the edge of the trees, its wheezing breaths filling the night. It stared at me, those black eyes boring into my soul. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to scream. My flashlight slipped from my grasp, clattering to the ground. The wheezing turned into a low growl, a sound that vibrated through my bones. It took a step towards me, its long limbs moving with an unnatural grace. I could smell it now, a sickeningly sweet odor, like rotting meat mixed with something else. Something ancient and foul. And then, finally, I found my voice. Help! I screamed. Somebody help me! The creature stopped in its tracks, its head cocked to one side as if listening. Then, with a swiftness that defied its size, it turned and melted back into the shadows. I could hear it moving through the trees, circling the campsite, its growls echoing through the night. My scream ripped through the silence of the night, echoing off the surrounding mountains. Lights flickered on in the other tents, and I could hear shouts of alarm. What the hell was that? Who's screaming? Is everyone okay? I scrambled to my feet, my legs still shaking. It's me! I yelled back. Something's out here. The other students started to emerge from their tents, blinking in the sudden light. They were all half-dressed, confused and scared. Professor Davies pushed his way to the front, his face grim. What is it? What's going on? I pointed towards the trees, my voice trembling. There's something out there. I saw it. It's... I couldn't even describe it. Words failed me. Dr. Ramirez grabbed my arm. Calm down, she said. Just tell us what you saw. I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. It was tall and thin, with long arms and legs, and a weird head, and it was wheezing. The other students exchanged nervous glances. Professor Davies sighed. Look, I'm sure it was just an animal. A bear, maybe. Or a mountain lion. No! I insisted. It wasn't like any animal I've ever seen before. It was like something out of a nightmare. Dr. Ramirez looked at me, her eyes narrowed. Did you see any tracks? I nodded. Yes. By my tent. 3-toed tracks with long claws. Dr. Ramirez's expression changed. She turned to the other students. Everyone, grab your flashlights and anything you can use as a weapon. We need to search the area. The students hesitated, but they did as they were told. Soon, the campsite was swarming with people, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. But no one found anything. No sign of the creature. No more tracks. The rest of the night was pure torture. Nobody wanted to go back to their tents, so we all huddled around the campfire, keeping watch. The flames crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. Every time a branch snapped or an owl hooted, we jumped, our hearts in our throats. Professor Davies tried to keep everyone calm, but even he looked shaken. Dr. Ramirez was on edge, her eyes constantly scanning the darkness. The other students were a mix of fear and disbelief. Some were whispering about what I had seen, while others were trying to convince themselves it was all just a bad dream. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion started to set in. People were nodding off, their heads drooping. But nobody dared to sleep. We all knew that if we let our guard down, that thing would be back. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the first rays of dawn started to creep over the horizon. The darkness began to recede, and the shadows retreated. With the coming of daylight, a sense of relief washed over us. Maybe it was over. Maybe it had all been a bad dream. But then, as we were packing up our gear, we found them. More tracks. Fresh ones. Leading away from the campsite, deeper into the forest. They were the same three-toed tracks, with those long, terrifying claw marks. Whatever it was still out there. Watching us. Waiting. The professors held an emergency meeting after we found those new tracks. They were whispering amongst themselves, their faces grim. I could tell they were freaking out, but they were trying to keep it together for the sake of the students. Finally, Professor Davies called us all together. "All right, everyone," he announced, his voice strained. "I know this is unexpected, but we've decided to call off the field school. We can't risk anyone's safety." A collective groan went through the group. We had all been looking forward to this field school for months. But deep down, I think we were all relieved. Nobody wanted to spend another night on that mountain. We packed up our gear as quickly as we could, throwing everything into the trucks. Nobody spoke much. The atmosphere was thick with fear and anxiety. We just wanted to get out of there. As we drove down the winding mountain road, I kept looking back over my shoulder, half expecting to see that creature standing on the ridge, watching us go. But there was nothing there. Just the trees and the rocks and the endless sky. By the time we reached the highway, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The nightmare was over. We were safe. Or so I thought. Back home, everything felt off. Like I was living in a dream. I went through the motions, going to class, hanging out with friends, trying to pretend that everything was normal. But it wasn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That I was being watched. I started having nightmares. Vivid, terrifying nightmares about that creature. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. The image of those black eyes burned into my mind. I tried to talk to my friends about it, but they just laughed it off. "Dude, you're obsessed," they said. It was just a bad dream. Get over it. But I couldn't get over it. It was more than just a bad dream. It was real. I knew it was. I started researching. I spent hours online, reading about local legends and myths, trying to find something, anything, that could explain what I had seen. I even went to the library and dug through old books on folklore and cryptozoology. And then, I found it. An old Native American legend about a creature that lived in the mountains. A creature they called the Skinwalker. It was said to be a tall, gaunt creature with long limbs and a misshapen head. It could mimic human voices, and it preyed on those who wandered alone at night. The description sent chills down my spine. It was a perfect match for the creature I had seen. I realized then that the nightmare wasn't over. It had just begun. The Skinwalker was real. And it was out there, somewhere, waiting for me. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know one thing. I'll never be the same again. I'm not really the outdoorsy type. Never have been. Give me a good book and a comfy couch over a tent and a bug-infested forest any day. But Buddy, my golden retriever, he's the opposite. The dude lives for the outdoors. So, when he started whining and pawing at the back door Saturday morning, I figured, why not? It was a beautiful day, sunny but not too hot, with a nice breeze. Perfect for a hike. We usually go to the park, but I was feeling a little adventurous, or maybe Buddy's enthusiasm was contagious. Either way, I decided to take him to the trailhead off Old Mill Road. It's a pretty popular spot, not too isolated, which is important for someone like me who gets freaked out by their own shadow sometimes. I grabbed Buddy's leash, a bottle of water for me, and a collapsible bowl for the big guy, and we set off. The trail starts out pretty normal, wide and well maintained. Buddy was ecstatic, pulling at the leash, sniffing every tree and bush, his tail wagging like crazy. He even chased a couple of squirrels, which always cracks me up. I mean, he never catches them, but the sheer joy on his face is priceless. As we got deeper into the woods, the trail narrowed a bit, and the trees got thicker. It was quieter too, except for the sound of Buddy's panting and the occasional bird chirping. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating dappled patterns on the ground. It was actually quite peaceful. But then, Buddy started acting weird. Now, Buddy's not a small dog. He's a golden retriever, all muscle and fluff, and he's usually fearless. Squirrels, rabbits, even the occasional grumpy raccoon, nothing fazes him. But back there on the trail, he was acting like a scared puppy. He'd stopped pulling on the leash entirely and was practically glued to my leg, whining softly. His tail, usually wagging a mile a minute, was tucked between his legs. I crouched down, trying to reassure him. "Hey, Buddy, what's wrong? You see something?" I scanned the woods, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just trees, bushes, the occasional flitting bird. But Buddy wasn't having it. He kept shivering, his ears flattened against his head, and he kept looking back down the trail the way we'd come, like something was back there. And the thing is, I started to get this creepy feeling too. Like we were being watched. It's hard to explain. It was like the whole atmosphere of the woods had changed. It felt heavier, quieter, like all the life had been sucked out of it. Even the birds had stopped singing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Buddy picked up on some animal scent, a deer or something, and was just spooked. But deep down, a knot of anxiety was starting to form in my stomach. "Come on, boy," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Let's head back." I gave the leash a gentle tug, but Buddy resisted. He didn't want to move. He just kept staring down the trail, his whole body tense. That's when I heard it. It was a low growl, deep and guttural, like something big was trying to clear its throat. It came from somewhere deeper in the woods, off the trail, but it was close. Close enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Buddy whimpered and pressed himself even closer to me, trembling. I swear, I could feel his heart pounding through his fur. My own heart was doing a pretty good imitation of a drum solo at this point. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the growl, but it didn't come again. Just silence, thick and heavy, pressing down on us. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the only living thing for miles around. Except, of course, for whatever made that sound. "Okay, buddy," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Time to go. Now." I pulled on the leash, and this time, Buddy didn't resist. He practically leaped forward, almost tripping me in his eagerness to get out of there. We turned and started back down the trail, picking up the pace. I didn't want to run, didn't want to panic, but my legs were definitely moving faster than they had on the way in. Every little sound, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, made me jump. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes or a set of sharp teeth following us. But there was nothing. Just the trail, the trees, and the unsettling silence. We were almost back to the wider part of the trail when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another hiker. Someone coming down the trail towards us. But then I realized there was something off about the way this person moved. They were too fast, too silent. And they weren't walking on the trail. They were moving through the trees, parallel to us, keeping pace with us. I couldn't get a clear look. The trees were in the way, and the light was playing tricks on me. But I saw glimpses, a dark shape, tall and lean, almost like a person, but distorted somehow. Longer limbs, maybe? Or was it just the way it moved, all fluid and sinuous, like a predator stalking its prey? My blood ran cold. Whatever it wasn't human. And it was watching us. I didn't say anything to Buddy. I didn't want to scare him even more, but I tightened my grip on his leash and started walking faster. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The figure, if that's what it was, kept pace with us. It didn't make a sound, but I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on me. I kept expecting it to step out onto the trail, to confront us, but it stayed in the shadows, just out of sight. We reached the part of the trail where it widened out again, closer to the trailhead. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were safe now. But then I heard the growl again. Closer this time. And it wasn't just one growl. It was a chorus of growls, deep and menacing, coming from all around us. I froze. Buddy whimpered and tried to hide behind me. I looked around frantically, but I couldn't see anything. The growls were getting louder, closer. I felt trapped, surrounded. And then I saw them. They weren't what I expected. I don't know what I thought. Maybe something monstrous, something with fangs and claws. But these things, they were almost human. Almost. They were tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and impossibly thin. Their limbs were long and spindly, their fingers elongated, tipped with what looked like claws. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and stretched tight over their bones. But it was their faces that really got to me. They had faces, but they were wrong. The eyes were too big, too dark, and set too far apart. The mouths were wide, lipless, filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. There were 3 of them, maybe 4, I couldn't tell for sure. They were circling us, moving silently through the trees, their eyes fixed on us. They didn't growl anymore. They didn't need to. Their silence was more terrifying than any sound. Buddy was whimpering, trying to pull me back. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. One of the creatures stepped forward, its eyes boring into mine. It raised a hand, its long, clawed fingers reaching towards me. I screamed and stumbled back, pulling Buddy with me. The creature didn't attack. It just stood there, watching me, its eyes filled with a cold, predatory hunger. Then, it turned and melted back into the trees, followed by the others. I didn't wait to see where they went. I turned and ran, dragging Buddy behind me. We ran until we reached the parking lot, until we were safely inside my car, the doors locked, the engine running. Even then, I didn't feel safe. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those pale faces peering in through the windows. I drove home as fast as I could, never taking my eyes off the road. When I finally got home, I collapsed on the couch, shaking and sobbing. Buddy curled up next to me, whimpering softly. I don't know what those things were. I don't know where they came from. But I know one thing, I'm never going back to those woods again. When I got home, I didn't even bother taking Buddy for a proper walk. I just let him out in the backyard, and he didn't even try to run around like he usually does. He just stuck close to the house, sniffing around nervously, and then quickly ran back inside. I couldn't blame him. I was a wreck myself. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, those pale faces, those long fingers, the way they moved. It was like something out of a nightmare. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I tried to call my mom, but she didn't answer. She was probably at work, and I didn't want to leave a message about any of this. Who would believe me anyway? I'd sound crazy. Hey Mom, yeah, so I went for a hike today, and I was chased by a bunch of creepy pale things with claws and teeth. How was your day? Yeah, right. I ended up just pacing around the house, checking the locks, peering out the windows. Buddy followed me everywhere, whining and shaking. I tried to give him some treats, but he wasn't interested. He just wanted to be close to me, like I could somehow protect him. As the day wore on, I started to calm down a little. Maybe it was just a bad dream. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Or maybe Maybe I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that lived in the shadows, something that most people never even knew existed. I decided to try and forget about it. I put on some music, made myself some dinner, and tried to act normal. But it was no use. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of my mind. And then, as I was washing the dishes, I saw it. It was a footprint. A muddy footprint, right there on my kitchen floor. But it wasn't my footprint, and it definitely wasn't Buddy's. It was too big, too long, and the shape was all wrong. It looked almost human, but the toes were elongated, almost like claws. My blood ran cold. They were inside. Somehow, they had gotten inside my house. I grabbed a knife from the drawer, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Buddy was whimpering and cowering behind me, his tail tucked between his legs. I crept through the house, checking every room, every closet, every corner. But there was nothing. No sign of the creatures. Just that one footprint, a chilling reminder that I wasn't safe, not even in my own home. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch with Buddy, the knife clutched in my hand. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent my heart racing. By morning, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I needed to get out, to go somewhere safe. I packed a bag for myself and Buddy, and we left the house. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew we couldn't stay there. As I was driving, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those pale faces peering out from the back seat. But there was nothing. Just the empty road stretching out behind me. I drove for hours, until I was far away from the woods, far away from the creatures. Finally, I found a motel and checked in. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and collapsed on the bed. Buddy curled up next to me, and I fell asleep, exhausted but safe. Or so I thought. I woke up with a gasp, my heart pounding. Buddy was whining next to me, his fur on end. I sat up, listening intently, but I couldn't hear anything unusual. Just the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic. But I still felt uneasy. Like something was wrong. Like I was being watched. I got up and checked the door. It was still locked. I peeked out the window, but there was nothing there. Just a motel parking lot, bathed in the harsh light of the midday sun. I tried to tell myself it was just a bad dream, that the creatures were gone. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. They were still out there. And they were coming for me. I spent the rest of the day in the motel room, too scared to go out. I watched TV, tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate. All I could think about were those creatures. Their pale faces, their long fingers, their cold, predatory eyes. As night fell, my fear grew even stronger. I knew they would be coming. I could feel it. I barricaded the door with the dresser and the nightstand. I pulled the curtains tight and turned off all the lights. Then, I huddled in the corner of the room with Buddy, clutching him close. We waited. And then, we heard it. A scratching sound. A soft, scraping sound, like something was dragging itself across the roof of the motel room. Buddy whimpered and burrowed his head under my arm. I held my breath, listening, every nerve in my body on high alert. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, moving back and forth across the roof. It was like whatever was up there was trying to find a way in. Then, a thud. Something heavy landed on the roof, right above us. The whole room shook. Buddy yelped and started trembling. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could disappear. Another thud. And another. It was like someone was jumping up and down on the roof, trying to break through. The ceiling groaned and creaked under the strain. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped up and ran to the window, tearing back the curtains. I had to see what was up there. But there was nothing. The roof was empty. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the deserted parking lot. I turned back to the room, my heart still pounding. And that's when I saw it. The ceiling was bulging downwards, right above the bed. The plaster was cracking, and I could see something moving beneath it. Something long and thin, pushing its way through. I screamed and grabbed Buddy, pulling him away from the bed just as the ceiling gave way. A long, clawed hand burst through the plaster, followed by another and another. The creatures were coming in. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I grabbed Buddy, and we scrambled out of the motel room, leaving everything behind. We ran across the parking lot, not stopping until we reached the main road. I didn't know where to go, what to do. I was terrified, exhausted, and completely alone. Buddy was whimpering and shaking, his eyes wide with fear. I felt so helpless, so responsible for putting him in this danger. We walked for what felt like hours, just following the road, not knowing where it would lead us. The sun was starting to rise, casting long shadows across the deserted landscape. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those creatures emerge from the darkness, but they didn't appear. Maybe we'd lost them. Maybe they'd given up the chase. Or maybe they were just waiting, watching us from the shadows, biding their time. I didn't know. And I didn't want to find out. We kept walking until we came to a small town. We found a diner and went inside. The warmth and the smell of coffee were a welcome relief. I ordered some breakfast for myself and a bowl of water for Buddy. As we ate, I tried to think about what to do next. I couldn't go back home. The creatures knew where I lived. They could be waiting for me there. I couldn't go to the police. They wouldn't believe me. Who would? I was trapped, caught in a nightmare with no escape. I finished my breakfast and paid the bill. Then, I stepped back out onto the street, Buddy by my side. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I looked up at the sky, the sun shining brightly in the clear blue sky. It was a beautiful day. A day for a hike. And then I saw them. Standing across the street, their pale faces expressionless, their long fingers twitching. They were watching me. Waiting for me. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. Buddy whimpered and pressed close to my leg. I knew there was nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. They were everywhere. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, as I drove along the seemingly endless stretch of Highway 395. I was on a solo road trip through the Sierra Nevada, the kind of spontaneous adventure I often embarked on to clear my head. The rugged landscape, with its towering pines and dramatic rock formations, usually filled me with a sense of peace, but this time, an unsettling feeling gnawed at me. Maybe it was the way the shadows stretched long and deep, or the fact that I hadn't seen another car for miles. Or maybe it was just the inherent eeriness of being alone in such a vast and desolate wilderness. Whatever it was, a sense of unease settled over me as the last rays of sunlight faded away. I had been driving for hours, and the monotony of the highway was starting to get to me. I decided to take a detour, hoping to find a secluded spot to camp for the night. Turning onto a narrow dirt road, I ventured deeper into the mountains, the dense forest closing in on either side. The road was rough, and my car bounced along, the headlights barely illuminating the path ahead. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a small clearing. It wasn't much, just a patch of dirt surrounded by trees, but it looked like an old campsite. There was a fire pit with charred logs, and a rusty old car parked off to the side, its paint peeling and windows cracked. It looked like it had been abandoned there for years. Despite the slightly creepy vibe of the place, I decided to set up camp. It was getting dark, and I didn't want to risk driving any further on the unfamiliar road. Besides, the clearing offered a sense of seclusion that I found appealing. I pulled my car off to the side, grabbed my tent and supplies, and started to make camp. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing around, scanning the shadows between the trees, but I saw nothing. Still, the feeling persisted, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck that made me uneasy. With my tent pitched and a small fire crackling in the pit, I tried to relax. The flames danced, casting flickering shadows that danced across the clearing and the surrounding trees. The light brought a small sense of comfort, pushing back the darkness that felt like it was closing in. I rummaged through my backpack and pulled out a can of beans and a battered old camping stove. As I heated up my dinner, I couldn't help but think about the rusty car parked at the edge of the clearing. It seemed so out of place, like a forgotten relic from another time. Who had left it there? And why? The questions lingered in my mind, adding to the unease that had been building since I arrived. I kept glancing over at the car, half expecting to see someone emerge from the shadows, but it remained lifeless and still. Despite the eerie atmosphere, I was determined to enjoy my makeshift campsite. I ate my beans, the simple meal tasting surprisingly good in the cool mountain air. As I ate, I listened to the sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl. The sounds were familiar, comforting even, reminding me of countless other camping trips. But there was something different about this night. A tension hung in the air, a sense of anticipation that I couldn't shake off. I felt like something was about to happen, something that would shatter the tranquility of the night. I was about to clean up my meager dinner when I noticed a movement in the shadows at the edge of the clearing. My heart skipped a beat as a pair of eyes, glowing faintly in the firelight, locked onto mine. A low growl rumbled through the stillness, and a large dog emerged from the darkness. It was a scruffy-looking thing, with matted fur and a lean, muscular build. Its coat was a dark, indeterminate color, blending with the shadows, and its eyes held an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. The dog stood motionless, its gaze fixed on me, and an unsettling feeling washed over me. I tried to remain calm, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I wasn't exactly afraid of dogs, but there was something about this one that made my instincts scream. It wasn't aggressive, not yet anyway, but its presence was unnerving. "Hey there," I said, trying to sound friendly. "Nice doggy." My voice sounded weak and shaky even to my own ears. The dog didn't react, didn't even wag its tail. It just stood there, staring, its eyes boring into me. I picked up a small stone and tossed it in the dog's direction, hoping to scare it off. The stone landed with a soft thud a few feet away, but the dog didn't flinch. It continued to stare, its gaze unwavering. A wave of fear washed over me. This was no ordinary dog. There was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. I felt trapped, vulnerable, alone in the wilderness with this creature that seemed to emanate an aura of menace. Just as I was starting to think about making a run for my car, a voice cut through the silence. It was a man's voice, low and raspy, seemingly coming from nowhere. "Oh, we're gonna have some fun tonight," it said. The voice sent a jolt of fear through me, and I whirled around, frantically searching for the source. But there was no one there. The dog had vanished, and the clearing was empty except for me and the flickering firelight. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Was it my imagination? Had the stress of being alone in the wilderness finally gotten to me? I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that it was just a trick of the mind. But deep down, I knew that I had heard something real, something sinister. The voice had been too clear, too distinct, to be a figment of my imagination. Fear gripped me, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I grabbed a log from the pile beside the fire and held it like a weapon, my knuckles white. I scanned the darkness, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. The clearing was silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the pounding of my own heart. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like prey caught in the open. The voice had come from somewhere, of that I was sure. But where? And who had spoken those chilling words? Darkness fell completely, and the fire became my only source of light, casting flickering shadows that danced and writhed around the clearing. The once comforting flames now seemed to amplify my fear, making every shadow seem like a lurking figure. I huddled closer to the fire, trying to find some warmth and comfort in its glow. The sounds of the forest, once a soothing symphony, now seemed like a chorus of whispers, each rustle and snap a potential threat. I tried to convince myself that the voice had been a product of my overactive imagination, a result of being alone in the wilderness. But the memory of the words, "Oh, we're gonna have some fun tonight," echoed in my mind, chilling me to the bone. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted. Every time I glanced into the darkness, I expected to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. The dog, the voice, the eerie atmosphere, it all added up to a sense of dread that I couldn't escape. Sleep was impossible. I tossed and turned in my tent, every creak and groan of the fabric amplifying my anxiety. The night stretched on endlessly, each hour feeling like an eternity. I thought about packing up and leaving, fleeing back to the safety of the highway. But the thought of driving on those dark, winding roads in the middle of the night, not knowing what might be lurking in the shadows, filled me with terror. So I stayed put, huddled in my tent, praying for the first light of dawn. The night was a torment, a relentless assault on my nerves. I had never felt so alone, so vulnerable, so utterly terrified. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent my heart racing. I strained my ears, listening for any sound that might indicate I wasn't alone. Sometime after midnight, I heard it, the distinct sound of footsteps circling my tent. They were slow, deliberate, like whoever, or whatever, was out there was savoring my fear. I held my breath, clutching the pocket knife I'd managed to retrieve from my backpack, the cold metal a meager comfort against the terror that gripped me. The footsteps continued for what felt like an eternity, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, imagining eyes peering through the thin nylon of my tent. Then, a new sound, a dragging, scraping noise, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. It came from the direction of the abandoned car, and my mind conjured up images too horrible to contemplate. I couldn't stay in the tent any longer. I had to see what was out there. With trembling hands, I unzipped the tent flap and peered out into the darkness. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint, flickering glow. I scanned the clearing, my eyes straining to pierce the shadows. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a flicker of movement at the edge of the tree-line caught my attention. Something was there, something tall and shadowy, its form shifting and indistinct in the dim light. It was just a glimpse, a fleeting impression, but it was enough to send a fresh wave of fear washing over me. I ducked back into the tent, my heart pounding like a drum. I felt utterly helpless, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Whoever, or whatever, was out there, they were toying with me, enjoying my fear. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the worst was yet to come. Just when I thought the night couldn't get any worse, the dog reappeared. It emerged from the darkness at the edge of the firelight, its eyes glowing like embers. A low growl rumbled in its chest, and its teeth were bared in a snarl. Fear pulsed through me, and I scrambled back, my hand instinctively reaching for the pocket knife. The dog took a step closer, its growl growing louder, more menacing. Then, the voice came again, this time a chilling whisper from the darkness beyond the firelight. "You can't hide," it hissed. "We're gonna get you. We're gonna have so much fun." The voice was closer now, and it sent shivers down my spine. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct to fight or flee. I gripped the pocket knife tighter, my knuckles white. The dog lunged, snarling, and I screamed, raising my arm to defend myself. The dog snapped at my hand, its teeth grazing my skin. I cried out in pain and stumbled back, tripping over a tree root. I fell to the ground, the pocket knife slipping from my grasp. The dog loomed over me, its hot breath on my face. I closed my eyes, bracing for the attack. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard the man's voice again, closer than ever. "Don't hurt him yet," he whispered. "We want to play with him first." I opened my eyes and saw the dog backing away, its eyes still fixed on me. The man's voice chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. "We're gonna have so much fun," he whispered again. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get away, to escape the madness that had descended upon the clearing. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in my hand, and ran towards my car. The dog barked and lunged again, but I managed to dodge it and keep running. I fumbled with my car keys, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Finally, the door opened, and I tumbled inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. I fumbled with the ignition, desperate to get away. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as I sped away from the campsite. I didn't look back, but I could hear the dog barking furiously behind me. The dirt road was rough, and the car bounced violently, the headlights barely illuminating the path ahead. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white, my eyes darting from side to side, searching for any sign of pursuit. Suddenly, I saw it, a pair of headlights in the distance, gaining on me fast. It was the rusty car from the campsite, and it was closing in. Panic surged through me, and I pressed harder on the gas pedal. The car surged forward, but the rusty car kept pace, its headlights looming larger in my rearview mirror. The man's voice echoed in my mind, "We're gonna have so much fun." I could almost hear his laughter, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. The chase was on. I swerved to avoid a fallen tree, the car skidding precariously on the loose gravel. The rusty car followed, its headlights flashing as it swerved to avoid the same obstacle. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the rusty car gaining on me. It was closer now, and I could make out the silhouette of a figure behind the wheel. The man's laughter seemed to fill the car, taunting me, mocking my fear. I gritted my teeth and focused on the road ahead, determined to escape. The dirt road seemed to stretch on forever, each bump and turn a fresh jolt of fear. I was driving blind, pushing the car as fast as it would go, the headlights barely cutting through the thick darkness. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every rustle in the trees sounded like the footsteps of pursuit. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The rusty car was right behind me, its headlights like predatory eyes. I could almost feel the malevolent presence within it, urging it on. I imagined the man's face, contorted in a gleeful grin, enjoying the terror he was inflicting. The road twisted sharply, and I wrestled with the steering wheel, fighting to keep the car on the road. The rusty car followed, its tires screaming as it took the corner. I could hear the crunch of metal as it scraped against the side of my car, a chilling reminder of how close they were. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I had to get off this road, back to the highway, back to civilization. But the dirt roads seemed to have no end, winding deeper and deeper into the dark heart of the mountains. Suddenly, the trees thinned, and I saw it, the faint glow of headlights in the distance, the promise of escape. The highway. I pushed the car harder, the engine screaming in protest. The rusty car was still right behind me, but I could sense their frustration growing. They were losing me. With a final burst of speed, I burst out onto the highway, the smooth pavement a welcome relief. I glanced back, but the rusty car was gone. Vanished. As if it had never been there at all. I didn't stop driving for hours. I just kept pushing on, the need to put as much distance between me and that clearing as possible overwhelming any sense of fatigue. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkness, and I clung to it like a lifeline. Every now and then, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those headlights reappear, but there was nothing there. Just the empty road and the darkness stretching out behind me. As the first hint of dawn began to paint the horizon, I finally felt a sense of relief. The nightmare was over. I had escaped. I pulled over at a rest stop and stumbled out of the car, my legs shaky, my body trembling with exhaustion and residual fear. I splashed some water on my face, trying to wash away the memory of the night, but it was no use. The images were burned into my mind, the dog, the voice, the chase. I got back in the car and continued driving, but the experience had changed me. The carefree spirit I had set out with was gone, replaced by a deep sense of unease. The world seemed different now, darker, more menacing. I still go on road trips, but I'm never truly alone anymore. The memory of that night in the Sierra Nevada haunts me, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of the light. I see shadows where there are none, hear whispers in the wind. And sometimes, when driving alone at night, I catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those headlights appear again, chasing me down the endless highway. The sun was already dipping below the tree line, casting long shadows across the trail as I gunned the engine of my ATV. I love this time of day, the golden light filtering through the leaves, the crisp air, the feeling of freedom as I ripped through the woods. This was my escape, my way to unwind after a long week. I knew these trails like the back of my hand, having explored them countless times since I was a kid. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the fact that I was riding alone, my buddies bailing at the last minute. Or maybe it was the eerie stillness in the air, a lack of the usual birdsong and rustling leaves. Whatever it was, a sense of unease settled over me as I pushed deeper into the woods. I decided to turn back, not wanting to be caught in the dark. As I reversed course, a strange sound reached my ears, a rhythmic crashing and snapping of branches, like something large was moving through the undergrowth. It was coming from somewhere up ahead, growing louder and closer by the second. I slowed down, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? It sounded too heavy for a deer, too rhythmic for a bear. Curiosity and fear battled within me. I inched forward, straining to see through the dense foliage. And then I saw it. A flash of something massive, humanoid, moving with incredible speed through the trees. It was huge, easily 7 feet tall, with a rounded head and, were those tusks? I couldn't believe my eyes. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Panic surged through me. I didn't stick around to get a better look. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped off in the opposite direction, the creature's crashing pursuit echoing behind me. I didn't even look back. All I could think about was getting the hell out of there. I abandoned my ATV, figuring I could come back for it later. Right now, survival was my only priority. As I burst out of the tree line and onto the dirt road, I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing. Just the darkening woods and the sound of my own ragged breathing. But the image of that creature, that thing, was burned into my mind. I knew what I saw, and I knew I'd never forget it. The ride back to camp felt like an eternity. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I kept expecting to see that thing burst out of the trees and come after me. But it didn't. Maybe it wasn't interested in me after all. Maybe it was just curious. Yeah, right. Who was I kidding? That thing was terrifying. I finally reached the campsite, skidding to a halt in front of the campfire where my friends were lounging, beers in hand. They looked up in surprise, probably wondering why I was back so early and looking like I'd seen a ghost. Dude, what happened? Mark asked, his brow furrowed. You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I gasped, trying to catch my breath. Way worse. I stumbled off the ATV, my legs shaky. I sank into a camp chair, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through me. Okay, spill, Jen said, leaning forward with a smirk. What kind of wildlife did you encounter this time? A grumpy raccoon? A family of skunks? I shook my head, trying to gather my thoughts. No, it was. I don't even know how to describe it. It was huge, like 7 feet tall, and it was moving through the trees, so fast. It had this weird rounded head, no nose, and these tusks. My friends exchanged skeptical glances. Okay, Chris chuckled. So, Bigfoot with tusks? Did he offer you any berries? I glared at him. I'm serious. This was no bear or moose. It was something else. They could see the fear in my eyes, the genuine terror that still gripped me. The laughter died down. All right, man, chill, Mark said, putting a hand on my shoulder. Maybe it was just a bear, you know, the light playing tricks on you. It gets dark in those woods. No, I insisted. It wasn't a bear. It was something unnatural. They tried to reason with me, offering logical explanations, but I knew what I saw. The image of that creature, its unnatural speed, its bizarre features, was seared into my brain. I knew I wouldn't be sleeping soundly tonight, that's for sure. And I knew we had to go back for my ATV. Nobody got much sleep that night. Every creak of the tent, every rustle in the trees outside had us on edge. We took turns keeping watch, huddled around the campfire, whispering about what I'd seen. Dawn finally broke, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. We were exhausted, but there was no way we were leaving my ATV out there. Besides, a part of me, a morbid curiosity maybe, wanted to go back to see if there was any sign of whatever it was. All right, Mark said, stretching and yawning. Let's go get your ride back. We packed up our gear, armed ourselves with hunting knives and bear spray, just in case, and set off down the trail. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Every snapped twig, every bird call made us jump. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, trying to make sense of it. We reached the spot where I'd seen the creature. The first thing I noticed was the trail of destruction it had left behind. Bushes were flattened, branches snapped, and there were deep gouges in the ground. It was like a bulldozer had rampaged through the forest. Holy crap, Chris breathed, his eyes wide. This is insane. What the hell did this? I pointed to a massive footprint in the soft earth. That's what did this. The print was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was huge, easily twice the size of a human foot, and it had these weird, almost claw-like marks. That's not a bear, Jen said, her voice barely above a whisper. We followed the trail of destruction for a while, but it eventually disappeared into the thick undergrowth. We finally found my ATV, thankfully untouched. It was weird though, why hadn't the creature destroyed it? It was like it was just passing through. As we headed back to camp, a sense of dread hung over us. We knew we weren't alone in these woods. Something was out there, something powerful and unknown. And it was watching us. Back at camp, the unsettling feeling lingered. We were jumpy, constantly looking over our shoulders, every unfamiliar sound sending shivers down our spines. We tried to distract ourselves with card games and stories around the campfire, but the encounter with the creature dominated our thoughts. We need to figure out what that thing was, I said, breaking the uneasy silence. There's got to be some explanation. Maybe it was just a really big, weird-looking bear, Chris suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. No way, Jen countered. Bears don't move like that. And they definitely don't have tusks. I've been thinking, Mark said slowly. Remember those stories old man Fitz used to tell us about the creature in the woods? The one he called the Night Wanderer? Old man Fitz was a local legend, a grizzled old trapper who lived alone in a cabin deep in the woods. He used to tell us spooky stories around the campfire when we were kids, tales of strange creatures and unexplained events. The Night Wanderer? I asked, a chill running down my spine. The one that was supposed to be super strong and fast, with a weird head? Yeah, that's the one, Mark confirmed. He said it was some kind of guardian of the forest, that it protected the animals and punished those who harmed the woods. I pulled out my phone and started searching for information about local legends and folklore. I stumbled upon a website dedicated to the myths and legends of the area. And there it was, the Night Wanderer. According to the website, the Night Wanderer was a creature of immense power and speed, often described as a humanoid figure with a rounded head, no nose, and prominent tusks. It was said to roam the woods at night, protecting the forest from harm. The description sent a shiver down my spine. It was a perfect match for what I had seen. This is it, I said, showing the website to my friends. This is what we saw. A wave of fear washed over us. We weren't dealing with just some unknown animal. We were dealing with something supernatural. Something ancient and powerful. And it was out there, somewhere in the darkness, watching us. The next few days were tense. We packed up our campsite and moved to a spot closer to the ranger station, figuring there was safety in numbers. But the fear was still there, a constant knot in my stomach. We tried to go about our usual camping activities, hiking, fishing, telling stories around the campfire, but the encounter with the Night Wanderer hung over us like a dark cloud. We can't just let this thing scare us off, Mark said one evening, trying to rally the group. We came here to have fun, and we're not going to let some mythical creature ruin our trip. Easy for you to say, Jen retorted. You didn't see it. You didn't see how fast it was, how unnatural. I know, Mark conceded. But we can't just hide in our tents forever. We need to face our fears. I knew he was right. We couldn't let fear control us. Besides, a part of me, that same morbid curiosity, wanted to see it again. To prove to myself that it was real, that I wasn't going crazy. All right, I said, let's do it. But we're going prepared this time. We spent the next day planning our expedition. We gathered supplies, flashlights, extra batteries, a first aid kit, and, just in case, Mark's hunting rifle. We also decided to go in pairs for safety. Mark and Chris would stick together, while Jen and I would be partners. The next evening, as the sun began to set, we set off. The forest seemed different this time, darker, more menacing. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden danger. We moved cautiously, our senses on high alert. We reached the area where I'd first encountered the creature. The trail of destruction was still there, a stark reminder of its power. We stood there for a moment, listening, watching. The silence was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. And then we heard it. The same crashing and snapping of branches, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. It was closer this time, louder. My heart pounded in my chest. There, Jen whispered, pointing towards a break in the trees. We caught a glimpse of it, the night wanderer. It was moving through the trees with incredible speed, its massive form a blur against the darkening foliage. This time, we saw it more clearly. The rounded head, the lack of a nose, the tusks, it was all there, just as I remembered it. And it was heading straight towards us. "Run!" I screamed, my voice raw with fear. We didn't hesitate. We turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, adrenaline surging through our veins. The crashing sounds behind us grew louder, closer. It was gaining on us. "This way!" Mark yelled, veering off the trail. We followed him blindly, scrambling through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces, thorns tearing at our clothes. We were running for our lives, but it felt like we were running in slow motion. The creature was relentless. It was faster, stronger, more agile than any human could ever be. It crashed through the trees like a battering ram, its heavy footsteps pounding the earth. We could hear its ragged breathing, its guttural growls, echoing through the woods. I glanced back over my shoulder. It was closer than ever, its massive form silhouetted against the twilight sky. Its eyes, two glowing orbs in the darkness, were fixed on us. Suddenly, Jen tripped and fell, crying out in pain. "Jen!" I yelled, skidding to a halt. She was struggling to get up, her ankle twisted beneath her. "Go!" she screamed. "Don't stop. I'll be fine." But I couldn't just leave her. I ran back to her, trying to help her up. "We have to go." Mark yelled, his voice filled with panic. "It's right behind us." I looked back. The creature was almost upon us, its tusks gleaming in the fading light. We were trapped. "Leave me," Jen pleaded. "Save yourselves." But it was too late. The creature was upon us, its massive form looming over us. We braced ourselves for the impact. The creature lunged. I shoved Jen aside, pushing her towards the dense undergrowth. "Get out of here," I yelled, hoping she could somehow escape in the chaos. Then it hit me. Not claws, not teeth, but a force like a battering ram. I flew backwards, landing hard on the forest floor. The wind was knocked out of me, pain shooting through my ribs. I gasped for air, my vision blurring. Through the haze, I saw the creature turn its attention to me. It loomed over me, its massive form blocking out the last of the twilight. I could smell its rank breath, a mix of damp earth and something else. Something primal and terrifying. Fear gave way to a strange calmness. I knew I was no match for this thing. This was it. This was how I was going to die. But then, a shot rang out. The creature roared in pain, stumbling backwards. I saw Mark standing a few yards away, his rifle smoking. He fired again, and the creature howled, clutching its side. "Go!" Mark shouted. "Get out of here." I scrambled to my feet, my body screaming in protest. I didn't look back. I just ran, blindly, desperately, following the sounds of Mark and Chris crashing through the undergrowth. The sounds of the creature's pursuit faded behind me. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get as far away from that thing as possible. I ran until I could barely breathe, until my legs felt like lead, until I collapsed on the forest floor, gasping for air. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the hooting of an owl. The silence was almost deafening. Where were Mark and Chris? Where was Jen? Were they okay? Were they even alive? I had no answers. I was alone, lost, and terrified. The night wanderer was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. And I was its prey. The forest was a maze in the darkness. Every tree looked the same, every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. I stumbled through the undergrowth, my clothes ripped, my body aching. Fear gnawed at me, a constant companion. Was I going in circles? Was I getting further away from the camp? Then, through the trees, I saw a faint light. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Could it be a house? A cabin? Anything with 4 walls and a roof would be a welcome refuge. I pushed through the trees, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a small, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, the windows boarded up, the roof partially collapsed. But it was shelter, and right now, that was all that mattered. I approached cautiously, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind sending shivers down my spine. I pushed open the door, half expecting to find some other horror waiting for me inside. But the cabin was empty. Dust motes danced in the shafts of moonlight that streamed through the gaps in the boarded-up windows. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was safe, for now. But for how long? The silence in the cabin was eerie. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, making you hyper-aware of every sound, every breath. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I explored the cabin cautiously. There was a small, rusty fireplace, a rickety table and chair, and a bed in the corner, the mattress stained and ripped. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I decided to wait until morning. It was too dangerous to try to navigate the forest in the dark. I would rest here, gather my strength, and then try to find my way back to camp. But as I settled down on the bed, I heard a sound from outside. A low growl, deep and guttural. The night wanderer had found me. The growling grew louder, closer. It was circling the cabin, sniffing at the walls, testing the flimsy door. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding like a drum. I had to find a way to defend myself. The cabin was small, just one room with a fireplace and a rickety table. There were no weapons, no tools, nothing I could use to fight back. Except the fireplace. I grabbed the poker, a heavy iron rod with a pointed end. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I stood by the fireplace, my knuckles white around the poker, listening to the creature prowling outside. The growling turned to snarls, then to enraged roars. The creature was getting frustrated. It slammed its massive body against the cabin walls, the whole structure shaking with the impact. I braced myself, expecting the walls to give way at any moment. Suddenly, the door burst open. The creature stood in the doorway, its eyes glowing in the darkness, its tusks gleaming. It lunged at me, its massive form filling the doorway. I swung the poker with all my might, the iron rod connecting with the creature's shoulder. It roared in pain, stumbling back. I pressed my attack, swinging the poker again and again, aiming for its head, its eyes, any vulnerable spot I could reach. The creature fought back, swiping at me with its massive claws. I dodged and weaved, narrowly avoiding its attacks. The cabin was a whirlwind of violence, the air thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and fear. I managed to land another blow, this time catching the creature in the eye. It howled in pain, staggering back. I saw my chance. I charged forward, driving the poker deep into its chest. The creature roared one last time, a sound of pure agony, then collapsed to the floor, its massive form shaking with tremors. I stood over it, panting, the poker still clutched in my trembling hand. It was over. I had won. But the victory was short-lived. As the creature's tremors subsided, I heard another sound from outside. More growls, deeper and closer than before. There was more than one. Panic seized me. I had to get out of there. Now! I didn't hesitate. I scrambled over the fallen creature, ignoring the blood and the sickening crunching sound beneath my boots. I threw open the cabin door and plunged back into the darkness. The growls were closer now, surrounding me. I could hear the creatures crashing through the undergrowth, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for rest. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. I burst out of the treeline, stumbling onto the dirt road. The camp was in sight, the flickering lights of the campfire a beacon in the darkness. I ran towards it, my heart pounding with hope. I could hear the creatures behind me, their enraged roars echoing through the night. They were closing in. I reached the camp, collapsing on the ground in front of the startled faces of my friends. "They're here," I gasped, pointing back towards the woods. They followed me. My friends didn't need any further explanation. They grabbed their gear and we fled, piling into Mark's truck and speeding away from the campsite, leaving everything behind. We didn't stop driving until the first rays of dawn painted the horizon. We found a small diner in a nearby town, the fluorescent lights and the smell of coffee a stark contrast to the darkness and terror of the night. We sat in silence, huddled around a booth, our faces pale, our eyes wide with fear. We had survived, but the experience had changed us. The night wonder was real, and it was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, a terrifying reminder of the wildness that lurked beneath the surface of our civilized world. I never went back to those woods. The memory of that night, the fear, the adrenaline, the sheer terror of being hunted by something so primal, so powerful, still haunts me. I know I'll never be the same. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and the trees creak, I can still hear those growls, those enraged roars, echoing in my dreams. The rusted iron gates of Camp Hemlock loomed before me, their sharp edges glinting ominously in the afternoon sun. A shiver ran down my spine, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. The air was thick with the smell of pine needles and damp earth, a cloying sweetness that felt suffocating. I gripped the worn leather of my duffel bag, the handle slick with nervous sweat. This wasn't my first rodeo. I'd been to a string of programs for troubled teens, wilderness camps, boarding schools, therapy programs, you name it. Each one promised a fresh start, a chance to straighten out. But they all felt the same, sterile, suffocating, and filled with a sense of underlying dread. Still, none of those places had prepared me for the oppressive atmosphere that clung to Camp Hemlock like a shroud. The camp itself was nestled deep within a dense forest, a cluster of weathered wooden cabins huddled around a muddy clearing. A crumbling stone chimney rose from the main lodge, a plume of gray smoke curling into the overcast sky. Everything seemed to sag and groan under the weight of the oppressive silence that blanketed the camp. As I stepped out of the van, the metal door clanging shut behind me, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The ground felt unsteady beneath my feet, and the whispers of the wind through the trees sounded like hushed voices. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. A tall, gaunt man with a stern face and piercing blue eyes approached me. He introduced himself as Mr. Hayes, the camp director. His voice was a low growl that seemed to reverberate through my bones. "Welcome to Camp Hemlock," he said, his lips barely moving. "Your journey to redemption starts now." His words felt less like a welcome and more like a threat. My stomach churned with a growing sense of unease. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that something was deeply wrong at Camp Hemlock. The days at Camp Hemlock blurred into an endless cycle of mind-numbing routine. Every morning, the shrill blast of a rusty whistle tore me from my restless sleep. We were herded like cattle to the mess hall, a drafty cabin with long, warped tables and benches that dug into my skin. Breakfast was always the same, watery porridge with a side of lukewarm mystery meat that tasted vaguely of sawdust. The silence in the mess hall was oppressive, broken only by the clatter of spoons against metal bowls and the occasional muffled cough. After breakfast, it was a forced march into the depths of the woods. Mr. Hayes, a man who seemed to relish in our discomfort, led us on grueling hikes through treacherous terrain. Thorns tore at my clothes and skin, leaving angry red welts. Sweat stung my eyes, and my lungs burned with the exertion. The forest itself felt malevolent, the gnarled branches of ancient trees reaching out like skeletal fingers. I kept waiting for something to emerge from the shadows, some unseen creature with glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth. The afternoons were dedicated to group therapy. We sat in a circle on the worn log in the main lodge, forced to share our deepest fears and insecurities with a group of strangers who clearly didn't care. The counselor, a woman with a perpetually furrowed brow and a voice like nails on a chalkboard, would nod and scribble in her notebook, occasionally offering a platitude that felt as hollow as the expressions on our faces. Evenings were a brief respite from the relentless schedule. We were allowed an hour of free time, which usually meant sitting in our cramped cabins, staring at the peeling paint on the walls. Dinner was another silent affair, followed by a mandatory campfire. We huddled around the flickering flames, listening to Mr. Hayes drone on about the importance of discipline and obedience. His words washed over me, meaningless and empty. But it was the nights that truly terrified me. The darkness at Camp Hemlock was absolute, a suffocating blanket that seemed to swallow everything in its path. The silence was broken only by the creaking of the old cabins and the distant howls of unseen creatures. I would lie awake in my bunk, listening to every rustle and groan, my imagination conjuring up images of shadowy figures lurking just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. Sleep offered no escape, only a descent into nightmares filled with twisted trees, glowing eyes, and the chilling whisper of my name. One night, the oppressive silence of Camp Hemlock was shattered by a blood-curdling scream. I jolted awake, my heart pounding like a drum. The scream echoed through the darkness, a raw and primal sound that sent shivers down my spine. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. The other campers were stirring too, their faces etched with fear in the dim moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. We huddled together, whispering in hushed tones, our eyes darting towards the door. The scream came again, closer this time. It was followed by a frantic pounding on the cabin door. We exchanged terrified glances, none of us daring to move. Then, the door burst open. Standing in the doorway was a figure shrouded in shadow, its outline contorted and grotesque. A collective gasp escaped our lips. The figure lunged into the cabin, its movements jerky and unnatural. We scrambled back, our screams echoing in the confined space. The figure moved with an inhuman speed, its long, sharp claws glinting in the moonlight. I caught a glimpse of its face, a twisted mask of flesh, with eyes that burned with an unholy light. Its mouth was agape, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The stench of decay and rot filled the air, making me gag. The creature lunged at one of the campers, its claws tearing into flesh. Blood splattered against the walls, the screams of the victim mingling with our own terrified cries. Panic seized me. I scrambled towards the window, desperate to escape the carnage. I fumbled with the latch, my fingers trembling. The creature turned its attention to me, its eyes locking onto mine. I felt a wave of icy terror wash over me, paralyzing me in place. The creature lunged, its claws outstretched. I braced myself for the inevitable, squeezing my eyes shut. But the blow never came. I opened my eyes to find the cabin empty. The creature was gone, vanished into thin air. Only the bloodstains on the walls and the lingering stench of death remained as a testament to the horror we had just witnessed. I collapsed onto the floor, my body shaking uncontrollably. The other campers were huddled in a corner, their faces pale and drawn. We had survived the night, but we knew that we were not safe. Something evil lurked in the shadows of Camp Hemlock, and it was hungry for blood. The morning after the attack, a heavy silence hung over Camp Hemlock. The usual morning routine was abandoned. No whistle blew, no porridge was served. We remained huddled in our cabins, the door firmly barricaded with a rickety chair. Fear clung to us like a second skin, its icy grip tightening with every creak of the floorboards and rustle of leaves outside. Whispers of the previous night's events spread like wildfire through the camp. We shared fragmented accounts of what we had witnessed, each story adding to the growing sense of dread. Some claimed to have seen the creature vanish into thin air, while others swore they saw it melt into the shadows. One camper, his eyes wide with terror, described seeing the creature's claws elongate and morph into thorny vines that snaked around its victim's limbs. The attack had shattered any illusion of safety we might have clung to. Camp Hemlock, once a place of forced rehabilitation, had become a hunting ground. We were prey, trapped in a nightmare with no escape in sight. Despite our fear, a spark of defiance began to flicker within us. We were no longer just troubled teens sent away to be fixed. We were survivors, bound together by a shared experience of horror. We started to talk, to plan, to strategize. We searched our cabins for anything that could be used as a weapon, a rusty nail, a broken piece of mirror, a heavy rock. We knew we couldn't stay trapped in the cabins forever. We needed to understand what we were dealing with, to find a way to fight back. And so, we made a pact. We would face the darkness together, and we would uncover the truth behind the horrors of Camp Hemlock. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the camp. A hushed stillness fell over Camp Hemlock, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hooting of an owl. We gathered in the main lodge, a sense of nervous anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Armed with makeshift weapons, a rusty pipe, a shard of glass, a heavy book, we felt a strange mix of fear and determination. We were no longer the scared, passive teenagers who had arrived at Camp Hemlock. We were survivors, forged in the fires of terror. We decided to start our investigation in the old storage shed behind the main lodge. It was a dilapidated structure, its wooden walls rotting and its roof partially caved in. Rumors swirled among the campers about the shed, stories of strange noises, flickering lights, and a lingering sense of unease. As we approached the shed, a cold gust of wind swept through the camp, sending shivers down our spines. The door creaked open, revealing a pitch-black interior. We hesitated for a moment, our hearts pounding in our chests. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the darkness, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. Cobwebs clung to the walls, and the floor was littered with broken tools and discarded equipment. We moved cautiously through the shed, our flashlights illuminating the shadows. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of our own breathing and the occasional scuttling of a rat. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the shed. We froze, our flashlights trained on the source of the noise. A shelf had collapsed, sending a pile of old boxes tumbling to the floor. As we approached the fallen shelf, we noticed something strange. A small, wooden box lay half hidden beneath the debris. It was intricately carved with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering light of our flashlights. I reached down and picked up the box, my fingers tracing the strange symbols. As I touched it, a jolt of energy surged through my body, making me gasp. The box felt warm to the touch, as if it were alive. We gathered around the box, our eyes wide with curiosity and apprehension. What secrets did it hold? What connection did it have to the horrors of Camp Hemlock? We knew we had stumbled upon something significant, something that could hold the key to our survival. We carefully lifted the box out of the shed and brought it back to the main lodge. The fire in the hearth had died down to glowing embers, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. We huddled around the old wooden table, our faces illuminated by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. The box was cold to the touch now, the strange energy that had pulsed through me earlier completely gone. It felt heavy in my hands, as if it were filled with something dense and unyielding. The carved symbols seemed to stare back at me, their intricate patterns swirling and shifting before my eyes. We examined the box closely, searching for a latch or a hidden mechanism that would allow us to open it. But there was nothing, just the smooth, seamless surface of the wood and the enigmatic symbols. Frustration mounted as we tried every possible way to open the box. We poked and prodded, twisted and turned, but it remained stubbornly sealed. It was as if the box itself was resisting our efforts, guarding its secrets jealously. Then, one of the campers noticed something. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the bottom of the box. "There's a keyhole." We all leaned in closer, peering at the tiny keyhole hidden in the intricate carvings. It was so small and well concealed that we had almost missed it. But where would we find a key that small? We searched our pockets and belongings, but came up empty. Despair began to creep in. Had we come this far only to be thwarted by a locked box? Suddenly, I remembered the strange energy I had felt when I first touched the box. Could it be that the key was not a physical object, but something else entirely? I closed my eyes and concentrated, focusing all my attention on the box. I thought about the fear, the desperation, the shared sense of survival that bound us together. And then I reached out and touched the keyhole. As my fingertip made contact, a surge of energy flowed through me, and the box clicked open. We gasped in unison, our eyes widening in anticipation. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a small silver locket. It was tarnished and worn, but its intricate design was still visible. A sense of foreboding washed over me as I reached for the locket. What secrets did it hold? And what would it reveal about the horrors of Camp Hemlock? The locket felt strangely warm in my trembling hand. It was heavier than it looked, the silver cool against my palm. A sense of dread washed over me, a premonition that whatever secrets this locket held, they were bound to be dark and disturbing. With bated breath, we watched as I slowly opened the locket. Inside, nestled against a bed of faded velvet, was a miniature portrait. It depicted a young woman with hauntingly familiar eyes, wide and filled with a deep sadness that seemed to pierce through the years. Her lips were slightly parted, as if frozen in a moment of silent plea. A wave of recognition washed over me. I had seen those eyes before, in the fleeting glimpses of the creature that had terrorized us. The realization sent a chill down my spine. Could this woman be connected to the horrors of Camp Hemlock? As I continued to study the portrait, I noticed something else. A faint inscription was etched into the back of the locket. It was barely visible, the letters tarnished and worn. I squinted, trying to decipher the words. "Forever bound," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. What did they mean? Who was this woman, and what was her connection to the creature? Suddenly, the locket grew hot in my hand. I dropped it with a cry, the silver burning my skin. The locket clattered to the table, the portrait facing upwards. As we watched in horror, the woman in the portrait began to age rapidly. Her youthful features withered and decayed, her skin becoming pale and drawn. Her eyes, once filled with sadness, now burned with a malevolent fire. The transformation was complete in a matter of seconds. The woman in the portrait was now a grotesque mockery of her former self, her face twisted into a mask of hatred and despair. The locket pulsed with a malevolent energy, the air around it growing thick and oppressive. We scrambled back from the table, our eyes wide with fear. The locket was a key, we realized, a conduit to something dark and sinister. And we had unwittingly unleashed it. The locket pulsed with an eerie green light, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed across the walls of the lodge. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. A low growl, guttural and menacing, emanated from the locket, vibrating through the floorboards and rattling the windows. We scrambled back, our eyes fixed on the locket in terror. The creature, the one we had glimpsed in our nightmares and seen fleetingly in the shadows, was emerging from the locket. Its form was hazy at first, a swirling mass of shadows and green light. But as it solidified, the details became horrifyingly clear. It was tall and skeletal, its limbs elongated and twisted at unnatural angles. Its skin was stretched taut over its bones, revealing the intricate network of veins and arteries beneath. Its eyes burned with an unholy fire, and its mouth was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. The creature stepped out of the locket, its clawed feet leaving scorch marks on the wooden floor. It surveyed the room with a predatory gaze, its nostrils flaring as it inhaled our fear. A wave of panic washed over us. We scrambled for the door, desperate to escape the creature's clutches. But it was too late. The creature lunged, its claws outstretched. One of the campers screamed as the creature's claws tore into his flesh. Blood splattered against the walls, the stench of iron filling the air. The creature's growl turned into a triumphant roar as it savored its prey. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew we were no match for this creature. It was too powerful, too monstrous. We were trapped, cornered like rats in a cage. But then, a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I couldn't just stand there and watch as my friends were slaughtered. I had to do something, anything. I grabbed a burning log from the fireplace, the flames licking at my hands. With a roar of my own, I charged at the creature, the burning log held high above my head. The creature turned its attention to me, its eyes narrowing in surprise. It lunged, its claws reaching for my throat. But I was ready. I swung the burning log with all my might, striking the creature across its face. The creature roared in pain, its claws retracting. It stumbled back, its form flickering and distorting. The burning log had disrupted its connection to the locket, weakening its hold on this world. This was our chance. I yelled at the others to run, to escape while the creature was weakened. We scrambled out of the lodge, the creature's roars echoing behind us. We burst out of the lodge and into the cool night air, our lungs burning and our legs aching. The creature's roars echoed behind us, a terrifying reminder of the danger we had just escaped. We didn't stop running until we reached the tree line, the dense forest offering a semblance of cover. We huddled together, catching our breath and listening for any sign of pursuit. The forest was eerily silent, the only sound the pounding of our hearts and the ragged gasps of our breathing. We had escaped the creature, for now, but we knew we weren't safe yet. "What do we do now?" one of the campers whispered, his voice trembling. We looked at each other, our faces pale and drawn in the moonlight. We were lost, alone, and hunted. Camp Hemlock, once a prison, was now a death trap. We had to get out, but where could we go? "We need to find help," I said, my voice firm despite the fear that gnawed at me. "There has to be someone out there who can help us." But who would believe our story? Who would believe that a group of troubled teens had stumbled upon a portal to another dimension, unleashed a monstrous creature, and barely escaped with their lives? We decided to head towards the main road, the one that led to Camp Hemlock. It was a long shot, but it was our only hope. We navigated through the dense undergrowth, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Thorns tore at our clothes and skin, and our feet stumbled over hidden roots and rocks. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged from the forest and onto the gravel road. Relief washed over us, a brief respite from the fear that had consumed us. But our relief was short-lived. As we looked down the road, our hearts sank. A figure stood in the distance, its silhouette illuminated by the headlights of an approaching vehicle. It was Mr. Hayes, the camp director. And he was waiting for us. Mr. Hayes stood in the middle of the road, his tall, gaunt figure casting a long shadow in the headlights of the approaching car. His face, usually stern and impassive, was now contorted in a triumphant sneer. He held up a hand, signaling the car to stop. The car screeched to a halt a few feet away from him. The driver, a middle-aged woman with wide, frightened eyes, peered out the window at Mr. Hayes. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Hayes smiled, a chillingly predatory expression that sent shivers down our spines. "Everything is perfectly fine, madam," he replied, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Just a minor incident with some of our campers. They wandered off, you see, and I'm bringing them back." He gestured towards us, his smile widening. We shrank back into the shadows, our hearts pounding in our chests. We knew we couldn't let Mr. Hayes take us back to Camp Hemlock. We had seen the horrors that lurked there, the creature that he had unleashed. But what choice did we have? We were outnumbered, exhausted, and unarmed. Mr. Hayes was in control, and we were at his mercy. As he approached us, his eyes glinting in the darkness, a wave of despair washed over me. We were trapped, caught in a nightmare with no escape. But just as Mr. Hayes reached out to grab us, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. It was the driver, her face contorted in terror. She pointed a trembling finger towards the forest behind us. We turned to see the creature emerge from the trees. It was bathed in the eerie green light of the locket, its form flickering and distorting. Its eyes burned with a malevolent fire, and its claws dripped with blood. Mr. Hayes froze, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He had underestimated the creature, just as we had. It was no longer under his control. The creature lunged at Mr. Hayes, its claws tearing into his flesh. He screamed in agony, his blood splattering onto the asphalt. The driver, paralyzed with fear, could only watch in horror. We seized the opportunity and ran. We didn't stop running until we were far away from Camp Hemlock, the screams of Mr. Hayes fading into the distance. We never looked back. We never returned to that cursed place. But the memories of Camp Hemlock, the horrors we witnessed, and the creature that still haunts our dreams will forever be etched into our minds. We survived Camp Hemlock, but at what cost? The scars of that experience run deep, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks within the shadows, waiting to be unleashed. "Okay, Buster, you win," I huffed, finally giving in and clipping the leash onto his collar. Sarah was already way ahead of me on the trail, shaking her head and laughing. "He knows the word hike, I swear. Gets all worked up every time." Buster, our overeager golden retriever, was practically vibrating with excitement, straining at the leash and nearly pulling me off my feet. Easy, big guy, I chuckled, trying to regain my balance. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, the kind that makes you glad to be alive. Sunlight filtered through the trees of the Green Ridge National Forest, casting dappled shadows on the trail ahead. The air was crisp and cool, with just a hint of pine needles and damp earth. Perfect hiking weather. Sarah had picked this trail, some new one she found online. It was supposed to be a moderate difficulty loop, about 6 miles, with a nice lookout point about halfway through. I wasn't really paying attention to the details, though. Mostly I was just enjoying the peace and quiet, the feeling of being out in nature with my 2 favorite companions. We settled into a comfortable rhythm, Sarah setting a brisk pace, Buster sniffing at every tree and rock, and me trailing behind, taking in the scenery. It was all so normal, so peaceful. If I had known what was waiting for us deeper in the woods, I would have turned back right then and there. We hiked for a good hour or so, making decent progress. Buster was finally starting to calm down a bit, trotting along beside us instead of trying to drag us off into the undergrowth every 5 seconds. We passed a few other hikers early on, a couple with a toddler strapped to the dad's back, and a group of college-age kids who looked way too enthusiastic about being up this early on a Saturday. But as we got further in, the trail got quieter. I noticed at first the absence of sound. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of our own footsteps on the path. It was like someone had hit the mute button on the forest. I glanced up at the canopy, half expecting to see a giant glass dome over us or something. Weird, huh? I said to Sarah. It's gotten really quiet. She shrugged. Guess everyone else decided to sleep in today. She didn't seem too bothered by it. Sarah's always been more laid back than me, less prone to overthinking things. Which is probably why I'm the one who usually ends up worrying about locking the doors and checking the smoke alarms. But even Sarah seemed to pick up on the change in atmosphere after a while. The air felt thicker, heavier, like a blanket was being draped over the woods. The sunlight seemed to dim, even though there weren't any more clouds overhead. And then there was the smell. It was faint, but definitely there, a coppery, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. You smell that? I asked Sarah, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. She wrinkled her nose. Smell what? Like dirt? No, it's like blood, I said, instantly regretting it. Sarah's already a bit squeamish. She gave me a look. Don't be ridiculous. It's probably just some animal. A deer or something. I tried to convince myself she was right. But deep down, a cold knot of fear was starting to tighten in my gut. Something wasn't right about this place. Look, there's a trail marker, Sarah said, pointing to a weathered wooden post half hidden among some bushes. It had a faded blue blaze painted on it, and an arrow pointing further down the path we were on. See? We're still going the right way. I wasn't so sure. We'd been walking for what felt like hours, and the woods just kept getting creepier. The trail was barely visible now, more of a deer path than anything else. And that metallic smell, the one that smelled like blood, was getting stronger. Maybe we should turn back anyway, I said, trying not to sound as freaked out as I felt. This doesn't feel right. Sarah sighed. We're almost halfway, according to the map. The lookout point should be just around the next bend. Come on, it'll be worth it. Imagine the Instagram pics. I knew she was trying to lighten the mood, but it wasn't working. My anxiety was through the roof. I kept scanning the trees, expecting to see a pair of eyes watching us from the shadows. Buster, usually oblivious to everything except squirrels and the occasional interesting smelling pile of leaves, was now glued to my side, whimpering softly. Okay, fine, I said, forcing a smile. But if we run into a family of Bigfoot, I'm blaming you. We rounded the bend, and the trail opened up into a small clearing. But instead of a scenic lookout point, all we found was an old, abandoned campsite. A tattered tent sagged in the middle of the clearing, its nylon fabric ripped and stained. A fire pit was filled with cold ashes and charred logs. Scattered around the campsite were empty food wrappers, rusty cans, and other debris. It looked like whoever had been here left in a hurry. Well, this is depressing, Sarah said, her voice flat. Guess we took a wrong turn somewhere. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. This wasn't just some random campers leaving their trash behind. There was something wrong about this place, something deeply unsettling. It felt violated, like something bad had happened here. Sarah, I said, my voice low and urgent. We need to leave. Now. Sarah gave me that you're being paranoid look again, but I could tell she was starting to get spooked too. She was fiddling with the strap of her backpack, a nervous habit she has. Okay, yeah, this place is giving me the creeps, she admitted, her voice a little shaky. Let's just get back to the main trail. We turned to go, but as I did, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the dirt near the fire pit. Big, heavy footprints with deep impressions in the soft earth. They weren't like any hiking boots I'd ever seen. They looked more like work boots. And they were fresh. Sarah, I whispered, pointing to the footprints. Someone was here. Recently. Her eyes widened. She followed my gaze, and her face paled. Oh my God, she breathed. You're right. We need to go. Now. We practically sprinted out of the clearing, back the way we'd come. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone emerge from the trees behind us. But there was no one there. Just the eerie silence of the woods, broken only by our own panicked breathing and the sound of Buster's paws pounding the trail. We ran for what felt like an eternity, but the woods just seemed to go on and on. The trail twisted and turned, leading us deeper and deeper into the shadows. I was starting to lose hope. We were lost, alone, and someone, or something, was out there with us. Then, we heard it. A sound that cut through the silence like a knife. A scream. It was a high-pitched, desperate wail, full of terror and pain. It sounded like a woman, and it was coming from somewhere up ahead. Sarah and I exchanged a horrified look. We both knew what that scream meant. We weren't alone in these woods. And whatever was out there, it wasn't friendly. The scream echoed through the trees, sending a fresh wave of panic through me. Sarah's hand gripped mine tightly, her knuckles white. Buster was whining now, his tail tucked between his legs. "We have to help her," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that scream as possible. But I couldn't just leave someone to die. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But we have to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." We crept forward cautiously, following the sound of the screams. The trail led us to another clearing, smaller than the last one. And in the middle of the clearing, we saw him. He was a tall, burly man, dressed in camouflage gear. He had a shaved head and a thick beard, and his face was contorted in a mask of rage. In his hand, he held a hunting knife, its blade glinting in the dappled sunlight. And at his feet, a woman lay on the ground, her clothes torn and bloodied. She was still alive, but barely. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her screams reduced to weak whimpers. The man raised a knife, and I felt my stomach lurch. I couldn't just stand there and watch him kill her. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "Leave her alone." The man froze, his head snapping up. He looked at us, his eyes wide with surprise. Then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Well, he said, his voice a low growl. "What do we have here?" "A couple of witnesses." He took a step towards us, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I knew we were in trouble. This was no ordinary hiker. This was a predator. And we were his prey. My mind raced. Fight or flight. He was bigger than me, stronger, and clearly armed. But there was no way I was letting him hurt Sarah or Buster. "Get out of here!" I yelled at Sarah, shoving her behind me. "Run! I'll hold him off." She hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. "But what about you?" "Just go." I screamed. "I'll be fine." I didn't know if I'd be fine. Honestly, I thought I was probably going to die. But I had to buy Sarah and Buster some time to escape. The man chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Oh, this is gonna be fun," he said, taking another step towards us. He raised the knife, and I braced myself for the attack. But then, something unexpected happened. Buster, my usually docile golden retriever, launched himself at the man, snarling and barking ferociously. He latched onto the man's arm, his teeth sinking into the camouflage jacket. The man roared in pain and surprise, dropping the knife. He tried to shake Buster off, but the dog wouldn't let go. He was like a furry, golden missile, fueled by pure adrenaline and protective instincts. "Get him, boy!" I yelled, feeling a surge of hope. Sarah, bless her quick-thinking soul, grabbed a large rock from the ground and hurled it at the man. It connected with his head with a sickening thud, and he stumbled backwards, momentarily stunned. This was our chance. "Come on, Buster," I shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her away. "Let's go." Buster, still clinging to the man's arm, reluctantly let go and followed us. We ran blindly, not stopping until we were well out of the clearing. We scrambled through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces and thorns tearing at our clothes. I could hear Sarah sobbing behind me and Buster whimpering, but I didn't dare slow down. I knew that man was still out there, and he wouldn't give up easily. We stumbled out of the woods and onto a dirt road. I looked around frantically, trying to get my bearings. We were completely lost. I had no idea which way to go. "Sarah, are you okay?" I asked, my voice breathless. She nodded, wiping tears from her face. "I think so. Just shaken up." Buster was limping slightly, and I could see a gash on his leg where the man had kicked him. Damn it. I knelt down and examined the wound. It wasn't deep, but it was bleeding. I ripped a strip of cloth from my shirt and tied it around his leg as a makeshift bandage. "Good boy, Buster," I said, patting him on the head. "You saved our lives." He licked my face in response, his tail wagging weakly. We started walking down the dirt road, hoping to find anyone who could help us. But the road seemed to stretch on forever, and there was no sign of civilization. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. I felt a growing sense of despair. We were alone, injured, and lost in the middle of nowhere. And then we heard it. The sound of an engine. A truck was coming down the road towards us. I felt a surge of relief. We were saved. The truck pulled up beside us, and a man leaned out the window. He was middle-aged, with a weathered face and a friendly smile. "You folks look lost," he said. "Need a lift?" I nodded eagerly. "Yes, please." We got separated from our group, and we've been wandering around for hours. The man chuckled. "Hop in. I'll take you back to town." We climbed into the truck, grateful for the warmth and the offer of help. As we pulled away, I glanced back at the woods, a shiver running down my spine. I never wanted to see that place again. The truck cab was warm, smelling faintly of old cigarettes and pine-scented air freshener. The man, who introduced himself as Dale, offered us some water and snacks, which we gratefully accepted. Sarah was curled up in the passenger seat, her eyes closed, trying to calm down. Buster was dozing on the floor, his injured leg stretched out. Dale was a chatty guy, telling us about his life in the small town nearby, his grandkids, his prize-winning tomatoes. It was all very ordinary, very comforting. Almost too comforting. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Dale kept glancing at us in the rearview mirror, his eyes lingering a little too long. Or maybe it was the fact that he hadn't asked us any questions about ourselves, about where we were from or where we were going. He just kept talking, filling the silence with his own voice. And then there was the smell. It was faint, barely noticeable at first. But it was there, growing stronger with every passing mile. That same metallic, coppery scent that I had smelled in the woods. The smell of blood. I glanced at Sarah, but she was still asleep. Buster was awake now, his head raised, sniffing the air. He whined softly, his ears flattened against his head. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that the smell was just coming from the farm we had passed a few miles back. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Dale cleared his throat. "So," he said, his voice a little too cheerful, "what were you folks doing all the way out there in the woods anyway? That's not exactly prime hiking territory." I hesitated, trying to come up with a plausible explanation. I couldn't tell him the truth. He wouldn't believe us. He'd probably think we were crazy. We took a wrong turn," I stammered. "Got lost." Dale chuckled. "Happens to the best of us," he said. "But you're lucky I found you. It's not safe out there, especially at night." He paused, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "There's all sorts of things lurking in those woods," he said, his voice low and ominous. "Things you wouldn't want to meet in the dark." I felt a chill run down my spine. He knew. Somehow, he knew. My heart pounded in my chest. Dale's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken menace. I glanced at Sarah, but she was still asleep, thankfully oblivious to the growing tension. Buster, however, was now sitting upright, his ears perked, staring intently at Dale. "Yeah, those woods can be pretty spooky," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "We're just glad you came along when you did." Dale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You sure are," he said. "You wouldn't want to be out there tonight. Not with." He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. I didn't press him. I didn't want to know what he was going to say. I just wanted to get out of this truck. "So," I said, trying to change the subject, "how much further to town?" "Oh, not far now," Dale replied. "Just another couple of miles." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Just a couple of miles. We were almost safe. But as Dale spoke, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. Headlights. Coming up behind us. Fast. Looks like we got company, Dale said, his voice oddly tight. The headlights grew closer, and I could see that it was a police car. Relief washed over me. We were going to be okay. The police car pulled up alongside us, its siren blaring. Dale pulled over to the side of the road, his face grim. The police officer got out of his car and approached Dale's truck. He was young, with a stern expression and a hand resting on his holster. "Evening, sir," the officer said. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Dale shook his head. "No, officer. I don't." The officer glanced at us in the back seat. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, sir." Dale hesitated, then slowly opened the door and stepped out of the truck. The officer motioned for him to move to the back of the truck. I watched as the officer spoke to Dale, his voice low and serious. Dale was shaking his head, his hands raised in protest. But the officer wasn't buying it. He pulled out his handcuffs and placed them on Dale's wrists. I couldn't believe it. Dale was being arrested. But why? The officer walked over to the passenger side of the truck and leaned down to speak to Sarah. She woke up with a start, her eyes wide with confusion. The officer spoke to her for a few minutes, then turned to me. "Are you folks okay?" he asked. I nodded, still in shock. "We're fine. Just a little shaken up." The officer smiled. "You're lucky," he said. "You were in the wrong place at the wrong time." He explained that Dale was a suspect in a series of missing persons cases in the area. They had been watching him for weeks, and they finally had enough evidence to arrest him. I felt a wave of nausea. We had been riding with a serial killer, and he had almost gotten away with it. The police officer gave us a ride back to our car, which thankfully was still where we'd left it at the trailhead. He even called a local vet to check on Buster, who, despite his limp, was otherwise okay. As we drove away from the Green Ridge National Forest, I couldn't help but look back at the dark tree line with a shudder. It looked so peaceful, so innocent in the fading light. It was hard to believe the horrors we had witnessed within its depths. Sarah and I didn't talk much on the drive home. We were both still processing the shock of what had happened. We had been so close to becoming another statistic, another missing persons case in the local news. The thought made my blood run cold. When we got home, we collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and emotionally drained. Buster curled up between us, seeking comfort in our presence. We held each other tightly, grateful to be alive, grateful to have each other. The next few days were a blur. We gave our statements to the police, answered questions from reporters, and tried to piece together the fragments of our memories. The woman Dale had attacked was thankfully found alive, though severely injured. She was recovering in the hospital, and we visited her to offer our support. It was a difficult meeting, filled with tears and shared trauma, but it also brought a sense of closure. The whole experience left a deep scar on us. We were no longer the carefree couple who had set out on that hike. We were more cautious now, more aware of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. We still went on hikes, but we never ventured too far from the beaten path. And we always made sure to let someone know where we were going and when we expected to be back. The Green Ridge National Forest incident became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in the most familiar and seemingly safe places, danger can lurk just around the corner. It taught us the fragility of life, the importance of staying vigilant, and the power of human resilience. And it taught us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, as long as we have each other.